How do you explain the ache that follows a smile, the kind that pretends to warm you only to leave you colder than before? There are people in your life who laugh with you, cry with you, sit beside you in silence, and yet something in you keeps flinching. You can't explain it to anyone because on the surface, nothing's wrong. But the truth is, you feel spiritually malnourished every time they leave. It's like your soul is reaching out for something that keeps getting taken. And the scariest part? They don't even raise their voice. They don't need to. The parasite doesn't destroy you with violence. It disarms you with comfort. They know what to say to keep your guard down. They know when to touch your shoulder, when to apologize, when to cry, just enough to convince you that you're safe. And in that safety, they feed, not on your body, not on your money, but on your light, on your peace, on the sacred energy you don't even know you're giving away. They don't need you to suffer, they just need you to shine, so they can stand in your sun and call it their own. You start shrinking without realizing it. Your dreams feel harder to chase. Your joy takes longer to return. But because they're always there for you, you mistake codependency for love and control for protection. You begin to doubt your own senses. You tell yourself you're just being dramatic, that they mean well, that they're going through something, that it's not always like this, and maybe it's not. That's the trap. Spiritual parasites don't drain you all at once. They bleed you in whispers. They make you feel needed, seen, wanted, while subtly convincing you that you are too much without them. They weaponize your empathy. They wrap themselves in your kindness until you forget where you end and they begin. You become a host, not a friend, a vessel for their emptiness, and the more you give, the less you recognize your own reflection in the mirror. But one day, you'll feel it. Not in a dramatic explosion, but in the still, unbearable heaviness after they've left the room. You'll sit there, drained, asking yourself why your soul feels used. And if you're honest, brutally honest, you'll trace that ache back to the same smile you once trusted, the same eyes that looked at you like you were a miracle, while quietly starving you of your own light. That's when it begins, the awakening, not to their darkness, but to your own blindness. You were never crazy. Your spirit knew before your mind did, and now the unraveling begins. They speak your language, but their words feel hollow. They mirror your pain, your joy, your dreams, but somehow it all falls flat, like a performance done too well, and you wonder, how can someone stand so close to your truth and yet never truly see you? Spiritual parasites are not always malicious in appearance. Many of them are chameleons, skilled in the art of imitation. They study your spirit like a script, play the role of soulmate, mentor, protector, even healer. But when you search for depth, there's nothing beneath the surface. Just mimicry, just reflection with no source. And that, in itself, is the red flag, the emptiness behind the echo. You start to notice that every time you reveal something sacred, it becomes currency, not intimacy, not trust, currency, a way for them to gain leverage. Your traumas become stepping stones for their moral superiority. Your dreams become scripts for their next performance. They borrow your light to build their identity, but never offer their own. They wear your pain like a costume, but never walk the path to healing beside you. And still, you doubt yourself, because they say all the right things. They show up, they check in, but their presence feels cold, mechanical, like they're feeding off the illusion of connection without offering a drop of soul in return. Eventually, the illusion cracks. You catch them saying something that doesn't align with what they felt. You sense a delay in their empathy, a moment where their mask slips and their real face stares back, vacant, indifferent, sometimes even envious. That's when it hits you. You were never truly seen. You were studied, measured, mirrored, and you realize the ache in your chest isn't just exhaustion. It's the grief of knowing that what you thought was sacred was just survival for them. A way to belong without offering truth, a way to control without being accountable, a way to remain hollow while using your depth as camouflage. And that grief, that's where your power returns, because once you name the hollow mirror, you stop seeking your reflection in it. You stop explaining yourself to someone who never wanted to understand. You stop pouring love into a vessel with no bottom. The mirror breaks. The spell lifts, and for the first time, you sit with your own reflection, not through their eyes, not through their approval, but raw, unfiltered, and real. That's when you begin to see the cost of proximity without authenticity. That's when you begin to choose resonance over resemblance. And that's when the parasites start to feel uncomfortable, because your spirit no longer feeds their illusion. There's a weight you can't explain, the kind that sinks into your body after a conversation that looked completely normal. Nothing was said to hurt you, nothing was done to harm you, and yet you leave feeling like something was taken. You try to shake it off. Maybe you were just tired, maybe you're too sensitive, maybe they're just going through something and needed to vent, but that excuse only works so many times. Eventually, the pattern becomes too loud to ignore. You realize that every interaction leaves you emptier than before. It's not just emotional exhaustion, it's spiritual depletion, as if your energy was consumed, digested, and discarded without a single drop being returned. And that's how you begin to sense them, not through what they say, but through what you feel, or rather, what you stop feeling. The more time you spend with them, the further you drift from your own center. Your joy feels muted, your clarity fogs over, your body tenses without explanation. That's because spiritual parasites rarely ask for permission. They don't need to. They know how to siphon energy through silence, through presence, through invisible contracts you never agreed to sign. You think you're being kind by listening, by holding space, by forgiving again and again. But all the while, they're feeding on the life force that you were meant to protect, not sacrifice. And they'll rarely admit they're taking from you. Instead, they'll tell you how much they need you, how much better they feel after talking to you, how you're the only one who truly understands. And those words feel validating at first, until you realize that you're the one left drained, confused, and emotionally disoriented. Your boundaries start to blur, your needs start to shrink, and your intuition, the deepest, most sacred compass you have, starts whispering something is off. But you ignore it, because you were taught to be there for others, to hold space, to be the bigger person. What no one told you was that spiritual vampirism often hides in the language of emotional dependency. You'll see it in the patterns. They only call when they need something. They're never there when you collapse. They somehow turn every conversation back to themselves, even when you're the one bleeding. And when you finally express your exhaustion, they guilt you for not being as available as you used to be. They make your fatigue the problem, not their consumption of it. And here's the twist that burns. They're not always aware of what they're doing. Some parasites don't know they're parasites. They've spent so long being disconnected from their own source that survival becomes their default. They feed off others because they've forgotten how to feed themselves, but that doesn't make it any less dangerous, because even unconscious feeding still leaves you starving. And then comes the shame of realizing you allowed it, the shame of seeing the signs and dismissing them, the shame of knowing that your compassion became the very thing that made you vulnerable. But don't let that shame turn you inward. Let it awaken your discernment. Let it sharpen your spiritual vision, because this isn't about blaming yourself. This is about reclaiming your energy. It's about realizing that true connection leaves you nourished, not depleted, seen, not studied, held, not used. And the moment you start honoring that truth is the moment the parasite starts to lose its grip. Because without your consent, energetic, emotional, spiritual, it cannot survive. So you begin to pull back. You stop answering every call. You stop offering yourself as a bottomless well. And as you do, the parasite begins to panic. They'll accuse you of changing, of being selfish, of no longer being supportive. But that's not the voice of truth. That's the voice of dependence being denied its fix. You're not abandoning them. You're returning to yourself. And in that return, you begin to see clearly what was once framed as friendship, loyalty, or love was really extraction. And now you are done being food. Because you were never meant to be a battery for someone else's healing. You were never meant to bleed just to prove your worth. And you were never meant to feel guilty for needing protection from those who disguise their hunger as connection. You were meant to be whole. You were meant to be sovereign. And above all, you were meant to be free. There's a moment when you begin to rise, when the fog starts to clear and your soul stretches in directions you never thought possible. And just when you start to taste the edge of liberation, someone close to you recoils. They don't say it outright. They don't grab your wrist or block your path. No, it's subtler than that. A backhanded compliment, a passive-aggressive joke, a sudden shift in tone when you share something sacred. And you feel it, like a cold breeze in the room that no one else acknowledges. That's the parasite flinching, because your growth threatens their grip. Your awakening threatens their script. And deep down, they know that the more you expand, the harder it becomes for them to keep you small. You'll hear them say things like, "You've changed," but they won't mean it as a celebration. They'll say it like an accusation, as if evolution is a betrayal, as if your healing is a personal attack. And in a way, to them, it is, because spiritual parasites anchor themselves to the version of you that serves them best, the version that doubts, that pleases, that apologizes for breathing too loudly. When you start shedding that skin, they panic. Not always with rage, sometimes with charm, with sudden gestures of affection, with a renewed interest in your life. But it's not love, it's survival. They're trying to lure you back into the cocoon you fought so hard to crawl out of. Because inside that cocoon, they had control. Outside of it, you have wings. And here's what hurts. Sometimes the people who fear your growth are the ones you've loved the most, the ones who were there when you broke, the ones who held you when no one else did. But love, real love, doesn't fear your transformation. It expands with you. It adjusts. It celebrates. Parasites don't. They tighten their grip. They sabotage softly, not always with words, but with energy. They'll suddenly stop supporting your new path. They'll withdraw emotionally, just enough for you to feel abandoned, hoping you'll shrink back into the shape that made them comfortable, because your liberation reminds them of their own chains, and rather than free themselves, they'd rather clip your wings. But this is where the fire begins. This is where you choose between shrinking to keep the peace or burning to find your truth. And yes, it will cost you. It will cost you the illusions you called relationships. It will cost you comfort, familiarity, sometimes even family. But the price of staying small is far greater, because every time you dim your light to soothe someone else's insecurity, you abandon your own evolution. And every time you let guilt silence your growth, you feed the parasite that was never meant to follow you into your becoming. So let them flinch, let them fall away, let them misunderstand your glow. You are not here to be palatable to the people who only loved your pain. You are not here to carry the weight of those who refuse to walk beside you. You are here to rise, to unravel, to become. And anyone who fears that was never walking with your soul. They were feeding off your silence. And now, that silence is over. Because your truth doesn't need approval. Your growth doesn't need permission. And your wings, your sacred, hard-earned wings, were never meant to fold for anyone. They never told you, "You owe me." Not with words, but with looks, with silences, with carefully timed sacrifices you never asked for, so they could collect emotional debt. And suddenly, you find yourself entangled in a web of invisible obligation, not because you want to be there, but because leaving would feel like betrayal. That's the trick of the spiritual parasite. They don't just drain your energy, they bind you with guilt, guilt that you're not doing enough, guilt that you're healing too fast, guilt that you've started prioritizing your peace over their approval, and because your heart is soft, you believe them, you believe you're the one being selfish. You forget that love, real love, doesn't require a chain to keep you close. It starts with small things. They joke that you've changed since you've started setting boundaries. They make themselves the victim when you say no. They reminisce about the old you, the one who overgave, over-explained, over-apologized. And for a moment, you miss that version of yourself too. Not because it was your truth, but because it made others comfortable. So you wonder if you're being harsh, if maybe you're the problem now. But that thought isn't born from clarity. It's born from conditioning, from years of confusing love with duty, from being trained to equate discomfort with wrongdoing. And so you stay. You stay in conversations that feel like quicksand. You stay in dynamics where your light is expected but never returned. You stay not because you're blind, but because you've been bound. They don't need to yell to control you. They just need to withdraw, to sigh, to say, "It's fine," in that tone that's anything but. And because you've been conditioned to regulate their emotions, you jump to fix what you didn't break. That's how it works. You become the caretaker of their emotional wounds while your own go unattended. You keep the peace at the cost of your inner war. And over time, that guilt hardens into shame. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you've slowly abandoned yourself. You no longer ask, is this connection good for me? You ask, what will they feel if I pull away? And that's how you know you're in a cage, one made not of iron, but of unspoken obligation dressed as love. But guilt is not guidance, and love is not a leash. The people who truly see your soul will never tether you to theirs with invisible strings. They will hold space without demand. They will celebrate your boundaries, not punish them. They will not use their wounds to bind your worth. So if you find yourself questioning your freedom every time you seek peace, you are not loved. You are being managed. And the only antidote to manipulation wrapped in affection is the clarity to call it what it is. The courage to say, I am not responsible for your comfort at the cost of my truth. And when you do, the chains will rattle. The guilt will rise like smoke. But so will your power, so will your self-respect, so will your soul. You don't always notice the parasite while they're present. Sometimes it's only in their absence that you finally see the wreckage. The confusion, the fatigue, the strange silence that feels more peaceful than their company ever did. You look around at the fragments of your life, the unfinished dreams, the emotional bruises, the friendships that slipped away, and suddenly it makes sense. They didn't just drain you, they disoriented you. Like a storm that spins through your house without ever breaking a window, they left everything technically intact, but nothing in the right place. And now, you're the one left cleaning up the mess you didn't make, wondering how long you've been living in emotional disarray. That's how spiritual parasites operate. They don't leave scars, they leave shadows, doubts, disruptions. One day you're laughing with them, and the next you're questioning your own memory. Did I really say that? Was I overreacting? Maybe I misunderstood. But deep down, your body knows. Your nervous system knows. You started walking on eggshells without knowing why. You started editing your truth just to keep the peace. And the more you lost yourself, the more they seemed to thrive. Because chaos is their camouflage. As long as everything feels slightly off balance, you're too busy trying to stabilize to notice who's rocking the boat. And once you start asking questions, they vanish, leaving behind the emotional equivalent of a crime scene with no fingerprints. You begin to notice that their presence always preceded turbulence. A conflict with a friend, a loss of motivation, an emotional spiral you couldn't trace. It wasn't coincidence, it was interference. A distortion field they carried with them like a virus, infecting your clarity, your joy, your sense of self. But they did it with a smile, with affection, with just enough tenderness to make you question your own intuition. And that's the most dangerous kind of chaos, the kind that disguises itself as care. Because when harm wears the mask of love, it becomes nearly impossible to confront without feeling like the villain. You end up apologizing for bleeding. You end up trying to fix what they broke just to keep the illusion of peace alive. But the truth? Real connection doesn't leave you unraveling. Real love doesn't trail confusion in its wake. So when the dust finally settles and the silence starts to feel like medicine instead of punishment, that's when you know. You know that what you called love was emotional misalignment. What you called loyalty was spiritual distortion. And now you get to rebuild. Slowly, intentionally, without noise, without guilt. You get to reclaim your space, rearrange your energy, and in doing so you begin to understand that the chaos wasn't just collateral, it was a signature, a calling card of the parasite's presence. And now that they're gone, clarity returns like sunlight through a broken window. You can breathe again. And this time, the peace is real. There comes a moment when you realize the voice in your head doesn't sound like you anymore. It doubts you when you feel clear. It shames you when you reach for joy. It questions your intuition like it's guilty until proven innocent. And you pause wondering when this began, when your inner world stopped being a sanctuary and started sounding like someone else's judgment. That's the aftertaste of a spiritual parasite, not just the drain of energy, not just the chaos they cause, but the slow colonization of your inner dialogue. Their opinions nest inside your thoughts. Their fear seeps into your instincts. And soon, you're not sure which parts of you are truly yours anymore. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. They chipped away at your trust in yourself bit by bit. A sarcastic comment here, a raised eyebrow there. Are you sure that's a good idea? You're just too sensitive. You always take things the wrong way. You laughed it off at first. You didn't want to be dramatic. But those small dismissals became seeds, and over time, they grew into a forest of self-doubt. Until even your body didn't feel safe. Until silence felt like tension. Until your own intuition sounded like a threat. Because when someone whispers enough poison into your soul, eventually you begin to recite it as truth. You find yourself hesitating before you speak, replaying conversations in your mind like courtroom trials. You shrink in rooms where you once shined, and all of this happens while the parasite plays the victim. They say you've changed, that you're distant, that you're making things up. But deep down, something in you is screaming, begging to be heard beneath the noise. It's the original voice, the one that remembers who you were before the manipulation, before the guilt, before the slow erasure of your confidence. That voice is still there, faint, buried, aching, but it is yours, and it is sacred. Reclaiming it is not loud, it's not dramatic, it's slow, it's painful, it's quiet. You begin by noticing which thoughts don't belong to you. You question the inner critic and ask, whose voice is this really? You stop assuming every doubt is intuition and start separating fear from instinct, and little by little your real self begins to surface. Not the version they crafted, not the mask you wore to survive, but the you that was silenced, steady, clear, and untamed. And when that voice rises again, when it speaks louder than their ghost, you'll know the possession is ending and your soul is finally coming home. Leaving doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like death, like peeling off a second skin that's been fused to you for years. You tell yourself it shouldn't hurt this much. After all the pain they caused, after all the confusion, after all the nights you spent questioning your worth. But it does hurt. Not because you still want them, but because part of you was wired to believe their presence was love. You mourn the version of yourself that clung to the illusion. You mourn the time lost, the truth swallowed, the light dimmed. And in that mourning, a deeper truth emerges. You're not just walking away from them. You're walking back to yourself. The moment you cut the energetic cord, everything rushes in. Silence at first, then clarity, then a wave of emotion so intense it knocks the breath from your lungs. Grief, guilt, anger, relief, all tangled together like vines around your ribcage. You feel like a traitor for choosing peace. You feel selfish for protecting your energy. But this is the detox, this is the purge, the soul's violent reclaiming of what was taken. And though it burns, though it rattles every bone in your body, it is sacred. Because the only way to cleanse spiritual poison is to let it leave. Loud, raw, unforgiving. Liberation isn't clean. It's a mess of tears, shaking hands, and whispered prayers in the dark. At first, you'll want to go back. Not because you miss the chaos, but because the silence feels unfamiliar. There's no one to manage, no guilt to carry, no emotional storms to weather, just you. And that can be terrifying, because when there's no one left to blame, you must finally face your own wounds. The ones that allowed the parasite to enter in the first place, the ones that mistook control for connection. That's when the real work begins. The rebuilding, the reparenting, the sacred solitude where your soul learns to breathe again without fear. You'll realize that freedom isn't just the absence of the parasite, it's the presence of your own truth, unfiltered, unshaken, unapologetic. And eventually the pain softens, the silence becomes sanctuary, the emptiness becomes space for something real to grow. You no longer crave their validation, you no longer ache for their approval, you no longer contort yourself to fit inside someone else's brokenness. You become whole, Not because you've healed everything, but because you've chosen yourself over and over, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. And that choice, that sacred defiance, is the birth of freedom. It is the resurrection of your spirit, the reclamation of your power. And when you look back, you won't see failure. You'll see fire, the kind that purified, the kind that protected, the kind that finally burned the parasite out of your soul. At first, you don't trust the quiet. It feels too still, too foreign, like the calm before another storm. But slowly you begin to realize this silence is not emptiness. It is presence. It is yours. No more calculating your words. No more shrinking your joy. No more bracing for the next emotional ambush disguised as concern. There's no more mask to read. No more mood to decode. Just breathe. Just space. Just you. And it's in this stillness that the truth finally echoes back. What left was never love. What stayed was never you. And what returns in this silence is nothing short of holy. You start to hear yourself again, not the anxious hum of survival, but the voice beneath it, the one you buried to keep the peace. It speaks gently now, but with authority. It reminds you that love should never feel like surveillance, that connection shouldn't come with a cost, that peace is not earned by sacrifice, it is your birthright. And with every passing day, the sacred silence becomes louder than their absence. It teaches you things they never could. That stillness holds more answers than chaos. That solitude is not loneliness, but reunion, and that the soul grows best when no one is trying to prune it into something smaller. And then something miraculous happens. You begin to remember who you were before the parasite latched on. Before the guilt, before the self-abandonment, before the voice in your head stopped sounding like your own. You remember the softness that didn't apologize, the fire that didn't dim to avoid attention, the clarity that didn't second-guess itself. You look in the mirror and, for the first time in a long time, you recognize the eyes staring back. Not as someone trying to survive, but someone who has already returned from the underworld. Someone who learned to walk alone through darkness and came out luminous, not despite the pain, but because of it. This is the gift they could never give you, the one you earned, the one you claimed. The silence after the purge is your sanctuary now, not because it shields you, but because it reflects you, unfiltered, unashamed, unafraid. You're no longer a host, no longer a container for someone else's emptiness. You are sovereign, whole, untouchable in the way only truth can be, and while the world may still hold its parasites, your inner circle has been cleared. Your soul has been reclaimed, and your light, once siphoned, now burns with a knowing that no shadow can ever steal again.